We are starting, and thanks for coming. Thanks for coming. My name is Dinga Sikwebu. I was born in Cape Town, in a township called Nyanga, and I lived here until 1995 when I moved to Johannesburg. And I've spent the best part of my adult life as a trade unionist. I'm a retired trade unionist, having worked for the Metal Workers Union, NUMSA. But we are here to have a discussion with Vishwa Sadgar, who is an author of this book called A Love Letter to the Many. And I want us to have a conversation and let Vish speak about the book. But maybe as I introduced myself, Vish, you can just introduce yourself, and I am taking my hat off so that you can see me.
Well, okay. Thank you, Dinga, and good morning to everybody. And thank you for coming through, and thank you to the Jakes Gerwel Foundation for also hosting this platform. I'm now a professor of international politics at Wits University. I edit a series called the Democratic Marxism series. I also have a special research project called Emancipatory Future Studies in the Anthropocene, big word, but anyway, it's a heating world. And I'm a veteran activist, and we're going to be talking about some of that, so I won't get into it. Thanks, Dinga.
All right. As I said, the title of the book is A Love Letter to the Many, and I just wanted you, Vish, maybe to say why a love letter? Why a love letter?
Yeah.
Because also in the book, you make a distinction between two types of love. There's what you call vanguard love, and there's also what you call the love for the many. And so I wanted you to talk about the title, yeah.
Yeah, thank you for that, Dinga. So this title kind of goes back to a COVID moment in 2022 when I got a COVID infection, and it was really, really debilitating. When I got to the emergency room, I mean, I was convulsing and in a lot of pain and inflammation. And basically, the doctors didn't know what to do because COVID attacked my immune system. And, unlike others who ended up on ventilators, I ended up in a bed for 2 months trying to heal because basically medical science didn't have a solution. So that's a long time to be bedridden. And so I was kind of pondering what I was doing amongst you in this life, on this planet. And so this kind of book comes out of that experience. So just in terms of, the title, I mean, we are living in the email age, so it's kind of bizarre to be talking about letters. But anyway, so it's basically an invite. It's an invite to the public. It's an invite to all of you to sort of engage on three things. The first is this idea that, love. I open with a quote from Chris Hani. And Chris Hani is talking about a civic love, a relational love between us as South Africans, and how we can work with this idea to overcome race hatred. So I open with that, but actually the core idea of love here is best captured by a thinker called Erich Fromm. He wrote a little book called The Art of Loving. And in that book, he basically defines love as an act of giving, so not taking. So this entire book, which is over 600 words in length, which should have been 1,500, but the publishers forced me to cut it down, is about a journey of giving and not taking. And it's basically also inviting you to think about that notion of love. I think the second aspect here, Dinga, is that we are living in a society in which there's a lot of narcissism, banality, hypersexuality, and so on. And basically, what I'm trying to do with this title and this book is evoke an ethical conversation about the world we are in, the society we are in. And basically, I'm asking you to grapple with the question, does capitalism love you? Okay? It's a very important measure, if you like, about the society that impoverishes people, brutalizes more than human life, that basically takes us into wars and conflict, and now threatening the future of our species. So I think it's a very important ethical standpoint to use to measure this reality. And maybe the last thing I'll say about this is that we are facing the biggest existential threat as a species. We are living the fourth great crisis of capitalism. It's had 4 big crises, but this particular crisis, as I said, threatens to wipe out our species and other life forms. And so this book is basically inviting you to take that risk very, very seriously, to internalize climate science, to understand the magnitude of what we are facing and the challenge this brings for us and future generations. And it's saying we need to meet this moment again with this ethics of care, with love / kindness, if you like, solidarity, and of course a commitment to human flourishing as freedom. So yeah, Dinga, this is kind of where it comes from.
All right, thanks, Vish. I'm hoping that we'll have enough time to open it up, but maybe let me ask another question. Now, the book is not a biography. It is a collection of selected writings written over a period of about 27 years. And I just wanted you to maybe point to the sort of key moments of these interventions. I know there are many interventions, just 5 or so of the key interventions that you make. Yeah.
So this is it. These are what I would call sort of conjuncturally situated writings. They are writings that come out of the trenches of struggle, if you like, and they are part of the indivisible archive of one small part of the invisible archive of the South African left. I mean, the dominant narrative in South Africa around how we think the past, how we think politics, is within an African nationalist mold. And in some senses, I'm also challenging that. I'm actually basically putting out a body of work that is about positions of somebody who's to the left of African nationalism. Now, this journey that you want me to just highlight very quickly is a journey that begins in the Communist Party after 1990. My generation went into the Communist Party inspired by Chris Hani, not because we believed in the Soviet Union. We were happy it was gone. But here was a moment for us to rethink all the big and fundamental questions and to renew what it means to commit to a socialist society, a deeply democratic society, an ecological society, a feminist conscious society, and so on. So that was one moment, the Communist Party, early 1990s, trying to kind of figure out another kind of politics. The other moment was working in COSATU, in its think tank, and being at the coalface of sort of big macro policy changes. In my previous life, Dinga, I was trained as a labor lawyer, so I worked at Naledi, thinking with the trade union movement around labor market reform. And so also thinking about the kind of big challenges facing this radical, militant labor movement that we had in the country. So that was a key moment. And then, of course, kind of being part of the tripartite alliance when big decisions were being made, shaping the post-apartheid political order, one being economic policy choices, the sort of macroeconomic choices that were made by the Mandela government, basically deeply globalized this economy. And that's what we are living with now, sort of 3 decades later, with deleterious impacts. And then, of course, there was a moment outside the alliance where I chose, I worked because of historical reasons in the 80s in an Indian community. I worked with colored activists in a neighboring community in Pietermaritzburg. But in the and of course later with younger African activists. But for me, going to labor in the post-1990s was again getting closer to African people. I wanted to work very intimately with African people. And then I went into townships. For 10 years, I worked in township communities and worked with unemployed people's movements, waste pickers, informal traders, and sort of immersed myself in that world. But it was a world also of trying to figure out how do we kind of build alternatives. And then maybe 2 final points to make is that, the Marikana moment was very, very important. And I think that's where we also intersected with you, Dinga, when you were doing political education in NUMSA and trying to build the capacity of one of the most radical trade unions in the country to kind of, again, affirm its kind of left trajectory, to recognize that the National Liberation Project was becoming more and more anti-worker. And then maybe the last 2 moments here is the kind of Zoomification. And kind of breaking with the Communist Party and its leadership when they chose to line up behind Zuma. And it was a very painful set of battles that were happening, but principled, and those fights needed to happen. And then lastly, I would say sort of the climate shift in our country. I'm very, very committed to this issue. Over 20 years, I've been working on this problem. Terrified by it, but also believing that if we build a new mass politics around it, we can really, really, again, have a transformative way forward. Yeah.
Thanks, Vish, for that. I don't know how many people have copies of the book and have looked at it. As someone who saw the manuscript and also looked at it again, the book is a critique of existing orthodoxies, things that are accepted, and throughout Vish is sort of criticizing what is taken as the normal discourse. And I just wanted to maybe Vish to say, why is what I call critique important? And maybe you can give us examples. And this critique is quite widespread. It's what economic elites are coming up with, political elites. No one is spared.
Yeah.
The political parties, the EFF, the fees must fall. There's this sort of ongoing critique. And why is that important for you?
Yeah, so this is a very important question. So orthodoxy really is, if you like, a simple way of understanding it, is kind of thought that's unthinking. It's frozen thought. It's in a dogmatic mold. And on the left, we've had 150 years of kind of left politics, modern left politics. And the tendency amongst the left is to kind of freeze thought. So, if Lenin led a revolution in 1917, today in the 21st century, we must be like Lenin, okay? And we evoke that. Now, that's an example of an orthodoxy and a dogma for me. Now, the standpoint from which this book works to confront orthodoxy and / dogma, there's a standpoint perspective, which I'll just unpack very quickly. The first is at a philosophical level, is recognizing that there's nothing permanent, okay? Conditions are changing all the time. And if you basically treat ideas as transhistorical, well, philosophically, you're not being dialectical, okay? Okay. You really have to be self-reflexive about ideas. The second point around this is context. Context matters. Contemporary conditions matter. The contradictions we're facing today vis-a-vis capitalism are very different from the conditions of the 19th century or the early 20th century and so on. So you've got to kind of rise to that challenge. The third standpoint, sort of positionality, is around sort of value-centered praxis. So, you know, so there's two streams in Marxism, right? There's the scientific stream of thought in Marxism and politics, but there's also the warm stream. This is Ernest Bloch, the philosopher of hope telling us. There's the warm stream, which is about ethical critique, which is about sort of utopia, etc. So I really think the standpoint that I come at this orthodoxy with is these values, freedom, love, solidarity, and so on. And so confronting orthodoxies from that standpoint, for me, has been very important. Inside the Communist Party, as I said, there was that renewal moment where we could go beyond the inherited orthodoxies of Marxism, Leninism, and so on, and we could think in terms of our Marxism. And my generation was using that language inside the Communist Party. There was this moment in the 50s of indigenizing Marxism with colonialism of a special type and so on. Anyway, so that's one example of trying to confront orthodoxy. The other is sort of market fundamentalism. So for the past 4 decades, the world has been in grip by a body of thought that just privileges the market, okay, and corporations, the sovereignty of capital. Now that has created very, very precarious societies, very unequal societies. And every time the system hits crisis, they come back with the same answers: more market, more capital, etc., etc. Now, that's an orthodoxy that the book challenges. It's a kind of free market fundamentalism. But the other orthodoxy that the book challenges is this congealing. It's still emerging, but it's an extreme right-wing politics, okay? And it's been showing itself over the past 4 decades. It's exclusionary nationalism. It's a hate-based politics. It's polarizing. You're seeing it in the United States. You're seeing it rising in Europe. I mean, for the first time, you have fascists sitting in the Swedish parliament, in the German parliament, rising in France, etc. And you have that tendency here too, by the way. So again, I'm kind of, from a standpoint at which I'm looking at these things, from this, kind of philosophically, contextually bounded, and of course, from the standpoint of values-based praxis, I confront these bodies of thought because they are a problem and they are not going to help us move forward as a society.
All right. But in the book, you also say how the path of critique can be lonely. It can make you marginal. And I'm interested in that position of being marginal and lonely. What sustains you? I mean, I know that there's reference to low points in your life where your partner, Michelle Williams, was quite important in keep you going. But I think for people who are into not taking things as they exist, getting onto this path of critique, as you say, can be lonely. What sustains you?
So Dinga, the journey has been about left renewal and going against the grain of defeat. So, we didn't know it at the time, but, in '89, when many of us were on the streets and marching and unbanning the mass democratic movement and so on, globally, the forces arrayed against us really had the strategic initiative. By 94, with the collapse of the Soviet Union and so on, and the policy choices that were coming to the fore, our defeat was actually being consolidated. So for me as a young Marxist at age 15 in the 80s, so even in my own community, it was too radical for them, okay? So I had to navigate that world while doing politics in that world, but knowing that I'm an outsider, come the 90s, very consciously choosing the Communist Party. Again, knowing that, the game is really about the African nationalists and the Afrikaner nationalists setting the agenda and so on, but choosing to be on the left and consistently kind of walk that path. And again, you're living in between worlds, you're living between class structures, on the margins of society, because you're radical. You want to change this crap, right? So basically walking that path, I mean, being in township communities, spending a decade there, was also kind of, it was challenging. It was testing my ethical commitments, my political commitments, but I was looking at the big picture, right? Here's the vanguard elites. We're constantly reminded in the ANC by the ideologues, the ANC is a vanguard. You're a vanguard, but a smaller vanguard. But they were there, and the blue lights, the kind of lording over society, Marikana is happening. All these things are happening. The inequalities are widening, hunger at the grassroots. So kind of being immersed at that level and looking at the society and saying, wow, what is this? And then, of course, the rupture with the Communist Party in the context of the Zuma moment, recognizing that, that this decision, this fight had to happen, no matter what the cost, because the Zuma project, in my mind, was a dead end for this country, a dangerous one. And together with others, taking a very, very serious stand and paying a price for that. But recognizing that outside of the Communist Party and the ANC alliance, that the left was really not a force, And so journeying beyond that and trying to kind of make a contribution, keeping that renewal current alive, from inside the Communist Party through my Democratic Marxism series, sort of dialoguing with comrades like yourself and NUMSA, dialoguing with the broader left as much as possible, and trying to figure out, what is this post-apartheid crisis? What are the alternatives and responses to it? So it's, and also realizing again that there's a lot of work to do around this. So it's been a hard journey, but I have no regrets. For me, I'm not teary-eyed and sad and so on. It's been an exciting journey. It's been against the grain of defeat. And in my mind, all these ideas in this book and so on are what I would call ideas suspended in history. Okay, these are ideas whose time will come. Maybe not in my lifetime, but they will come because of the nature of the crisis. Our society is in a big crisis, and if we do not think deeply about the roots of this crisis and articulate serious alternatives, we will not resolve the impasse of our society. If you just think that the elite political parties that are hovering in this society are going to address the legacies of apartheid, the current crisis, well, I think we're wrong, we're deluded. We need serious transformation. So I think these ideas will have their moment. Maybe not in my lifetime, but later.
All right. Thanks, Vish. Just maybe to follow that up. I mean, I did say that this is not a biography. It's a collection of selected works, conjunctural interventions. Our country is full of biographies, political biographies. And maybe I wanted you to just say why the selected writings, and what do you think about biographies as history that we are exposed to most of the time?
History the historians will tell us, history is constructed, okay? So it's interesting in terms of this kind of outpouring we've had in post-apartheid South Africa. And we've had a lot of autobiography and we've had a lot of biography. And I think, it's telling important stories. Biographies are about lived experience, phenomenology, I mean, how we've lived our lives and so on and so on. And so, they give us some interesting insights. They put one piece of the puzzle together around maybe history and so on and so on. But yeah, I mean, this book is definitely not biography or autobiography. It has an introduction which we've been talking about, which situates these writings. But this book is really a sort of it's a record of an intellectual itinerary, if you like, over 27 years of again going against that grain of defeat and trying to keep left imaginary alive, trying to keep left politics alive, and the project of renewal alive. So yeah, in that sense, it's very different from your standard biography, autobiography. It's something different.
Yeah. I think the value of it is that the articles stand on the time and the context in which they were written. Because sometimes biographies, there's a sort of a post-factual recreation of things. And going through this, I felt that these were moments, and they are published as they were interventions at that point. It's not the rewriting the history. Maybe to just change tack a little bit, Vish, so that we can open it up for people to ask questions. There is an article that you wrote and which is republished, and the article was in the Sowetan on the 11th of February 2003. That's on the eve of the
Invasion.
Tanks rolling into Iraq. And you wrote this article called "Be Partisans of Peace." And you came back to this idea of peace again in another article when there was the war invasion of Ukraine, and you speak about if I want to quote you, you say that to take a stand for peace in the world today is more radical than mere opposition to war. And I just wanted to know why this issue of peace is an important issue in the past, but more particularly now.
Yeah, so, capitalism as a system is wired with violence. It's inherently violent, okay? And its violence expresses itself, as I've been sort of mentioning, in structural ways. So the poverty that people endure, the hunger in the everyday, the exclusion, and so on. But it's also violent in how it deals with non-human life, how it erases other species. Half of the wildlife we've had in the 20th century is gone, okay? It destroys ecosystems. Our marine ecosystems are on the brink of collapse and so on, okay, because of industrial agriculture, et cetera, et cetera. Anyway, it's a violent system. And war is an extension of that violent system, okay? It's an expression of what I call the logic of accumulation through ecocide. In other words, ecocide meaning the mass-scale destruction of human and non-human life. So war is the extension of that violence, of that barbarism, of that logic. And so, we have to, from where I'm coming from, in the kind of left critique that I've been sort of working with, etc., we have to see this in its materiality. So, here's interest involved in war. They want to profit from war. And, of course, lies goes with that, etc., etc. But there's also the ethical side of that critique, okay? So that material critique and that ethical critique is very, very important. Now, coming to these two moments, we could see as they were lining things up after 9/11 that they didn't have a case to invade Iraq. There were no weapons of mass destruction, okay? So this was constructed. This was lies. There was a jingoistic nationalism in the US after 9/11, and those rulers enlisted that nationalism, okay, to take war to Iraq. So there's a lot of lies. Tony Blair, all of these people should be held accountable for crimes against humanity, okay? So they went in there, they invaded a sovereign country. I'm not a supporter of Saddam Hussein, but they invaded that country, okay? And, fast forward to when they leave Afghanistan, under the Biden administration, well, the US, after $1 trillion of spend, violence, mayhem, destruction, they left defeated, okay? The US did not win the war on terror in the battlefields of Iraq, in the battlefields of Afghanistan. They did not, ladies and gentlemen. They did not, okay? It was another Vietnam for them. The Taliban's back in power in Afghanistan. It was a waste of time. It wasn't the proportional, just response to what happened in 9/11, okay? We have architecture for rights and criminality, the Rome Statute, etc. There were other ways of dealing with what happened in 9/11. Now, the invasion of Ukraine, well, for me, it's analogous to what Israel is doing in Palestine. It's colonialism. Here you have the Russian nationalism colonizing an independent country, okay? Now, I don't support NATO and its expansion, and I don't support the imperial designs of the West, but just what Putin has done based on his own revanchist nationalism, his imperial designs for going back to the expanded mother empire of Russia, etc., it's wrong, okay? But the bottom line is this, is that, the Putin's Russia is a nuclear power, okay? And, in the 20th century, when we had the sort of Cold War, there was a rationality to that around, mutually assured destruction. And both sides understood very, very clearly that if they press the red button, you say goodbye to everyone and everything, okay? And there were different channels and so on, okay? I mean, I'm arguing we shouldn't have gone there in the first place, but anyway, that's where we ended up. Now, in the current kind of world disorder, there isn't the kind of, if you like, architecture to manage the nuclear weapons that are there within Russia, within India, within Pakistan, etc., okay? And the United States, of course, okay? Israel as well, okay? So you have a situation, actually, in our world where we have 300 million people currently in war zones and in conflict. You have nuclear powers that are tottering on the brink. I mean, Putin is constantly saying to the West, you come for me, I will press the red button, okay? This is a very serious thing. This is a zero-sum possibility, okay? So for me, based on, the kind of transformative critique I've been talking about, for the left today, we've got to stand for a just peace. We've got to stand for a just peace in Palestine, for a just peace in Ukraine, for a just peace in Sudan, for a just peace in the Congo. And we've got to be able to stand up and argue this, okay, very honestly and openly, okay. War, and particularly on the scales that it can happen today in our contemporary world, will wipe us out.
All right, the last one for me for now is that from what you've told us, Vish, and what's in the book, you come from what is called politically a non-racial tradition. or the Congress movement tradition. But in the book or in some of the writings, you make a distinction between what you call radical non-racialism and the non-racialism, the official non-racialism of the ANC. And I wanted us to maybe talk about those differences and why the issue of non-racialism is important for today's South Africa.
Okay, no, that's a great question. So, I mean, this festival is also about exploring non-racialism and so on. Where is it today? So, you know, the idea of non-racialism comes out of the first half of the 20th century. Racialism in the first half of the 20th century was about race hatred. Non-racialism was against race hatred. So non-racialism, not this liberal, fluffy idea of just being colorblind. It's being firmly against racism and racial oppression. That's what non-racialism means in shorthand. Now, the tradition of non-racialism that developed in the national liberation movement recognized that racism couldn't be separated from capitalism. The kind of systemic racism we've had, the institutional racism we've had, whether you go as far back as kind of the colonial period or you go to the apartheid period, capitalism was intertwined with this racism, okay? And so radical non-racialism was definitely what our struggle was all about. You know, liberals would argue, well, if you remove apartheid, basically we'll be fine as a society. Well, we did remove formal apartheid after '94, but younger generations of intellectuals, of activists, myself and many others, will say, well, there's still a very, very deep pattern of racialization in our society. Young people talk about economic apartheid. Some people talk about the continuity of settler colonialism, etc., etc. So removing apartheid hasn't ended, if you like, patterns of racial exclusion and so on. So radical non-racialism for me is about recognizing that non-racialism was about a critique of a society that married capitalism and racial oppression. Now, after '94, the ANC decouples or separates those things, okay? We embrace rainbowism, we embrace deep globalization. We think the market is going to address our legacies of brutalization and so on and so on. And, you know, corporate boardrooms are going to bring us the post-racial nirvana. Now, that hasn't happened, and it's not going to happen, okay? And so the ANC's non-racialism, for me, is in crisis, okay? It's gone down this path. Let me just also say this Stinger. So I think, for me, recovering radical non-racialism is recognizing three very important aspects of non-racialism. Non-racialism, radical non-racialism for me, was part of lived experience, okay? And people built bonds. You know, there was a strategic essentialism. We had to organize in different race areas and so on because of apartheid geographies. But people in the national liberation movement found ways to build bridges, okay, in the 20th century. And biographies and autobiographies, Long Walk to Freedom, and many others, Sisulu's, etc., these biographies and autobiographies talk about this lived experience of building non-racialism, okay? So that's the first thing I think we must keep in mind. I think the second thing we must keep in mind is that it basically embodied itself in the strategic politics of the movement. The Freedom Charter is programmatic, strategies and tactics, etc., to achieve non-racialism, in my view, a radical non-racialism. And then thirdly, it located itself in deeper critical thinking. So theory like colonialism of the special type or other versions and iterations of racial capitalism and so on, all took us to this kind of place of deep anti-racism and ultimately non-racialism. So this was the scaffolding, this was the bedrock for my view, in my view, radical non-racialism. And this is definitely not where the ANC is. This is the non-racialism that is part of a people's history of struggle, and I think we must validate it. Our constitution gives us license to do that, and we must go back there and hold firm to it.
All right. I had other questions on climate, on Trumpism, but as we work with young people, they always say, please don't hog the space. So I want to open it up now. I had other questions to probe about the book, but I think it's fair to open it up. There may people who have read Vich's work or who may be interested in the things that is said, and I now call for people's interventions. Yeah. Let's say I'm waiting for hands. I was a union educator, and when we see no hands, then I used to ask, and what do you think, comrades? And then someone says, no, I'm not thinking. I said, but you can't be in a workshop and not think. So I'm looking for hands. There's a hand at the back.
I've just picked up your book and read one chapter, and I was fascinated, and I'm so glad to meet you. I was particularly reading that chapter where you speak about the threat to our oceans with the fracking that apparently is happening, and the charter you then created. Can you talk a little more about the creation of a charter, and those of us who are supportive of that can support you in that effort?
Thank you. So, you know, the kind of challenge we're facing around climate, it's what I call a post-normal problem. Post-normal in the sense that it's a problem that's complex. So, you know, climate and fossil fuels and carbon is implicated across the spectrum of how we live. You know, the cars we drive, the homes we built with cement, and so on and so on. The food we eat comes from a carbon-based system, etc. So it's a post-normal problem that cannot be solved by parties, by politicians, by a presidential climate commission, okay? The risks it's bringing, and it's already part of everyday life, you know, droughts, floods, etc., requires all of us to own the problem. Now, South Africa is facing, it's one of 10 hotspots in the world. Between 2028 and 2034, it's facing the challenge of a 1.5 degrees Celsius overshoot globally, given the trajectory we are now, even worse with Trump. But for us, it will translate to 3 degrees. And I got my science friends at WITS to help us understand this, and I challenged them to put a document together, which we took to Parliament. And basically, our food systems are going to be threatened by this. Our livestock is not going to be able to handle this. Our water resources, our dams can only handle a 5-year drought. We probably have longer droughts, etc. So this is a very, very serious existential risk to our society, and it's a problem we have to take seriously. The Charter emerges in that context. It emerges in the context of the worst drought in the history of South Africa. Our droughts normally are a 3-year cycle droughts, but this drought lasted more than 6 years. And we started campaigning, particularly with poorer communities, smaller towns and villages, because Cape Town's Day Zero captured the headlines, okay? But the drought was beyond Cape Town, okay? And it lasted for a long time in many, many other places that didn't have the capacities and so on that Cape Town had. So the Charter comes out of that process. And it basically led to us doing various things, challenging the media to put the spotlight on vulnerable communities where the real climate injustice was being lived, etc. But we also had dialogues. We actually invited the media. We tried to occupy the Sunday Times office, and the security kicked us out. But we eventually got the editors to come. we occupied the office of the press ombudsman, and we demanded that we have a dialogue with the media to mainstream the climate crisis. We had a dialogue with young people. And, whether you call it Fridays for Future, whether you call it, young people for climate justice, etc., many of them were beginning to step in front of our society, 2018, 2019. So we gathered them and we spoke about, well, what do you see as the solutions to this big problem? We brought the unions together to talk about this problem and how can unions controlling pension funds, etc., how can they contribute? We brought faith-based communities together as well. So we had a broad spectrum dialogue, and the charter comes out of that. And I think for us, this idea of charters is actually very much a South African tradition of politics, and we shouldn't throw it away. It's an important one. The South African Constitution, Section 234, provides for charters to be adopted. So we did our research on this. And we said, right, we're taking this charter to Parliament, and we took it online during COVID in 2020, October 16, together with the climate science document. And basically, we were saying to our Parliament, this problem is real, it's coming, we've got to phase out fossil fuels very fast, no offshore oil and gas, etc., etc. They didn't listen to us. We took a fire brigade to the gates of Parliament in 2021 with young people. They didn't listen to us. We are now full throttle reproducing the minerals energy complex. We're extending it from the coal fields in Mpumalanga, which, by the way, have been expanding, now to the oceans. And there's about 29 licenses in the pipeline, coast to coast, okay? Which already, we have precarious coastal marine systems. We are now adding this kind of blasting and kind of exploration and so on to our coastal ecosystems. This is going to be devastating for wildlife in our oceans, etc. But it's also going to be devastating for us, because if we hit that oil find and we extract it, well, ladies and gentlemen, more oil, more gas, etc., means more greenhouse gases, more heating. So it's self-defeating, it's irrational. So we need to rally together. This is not about me. The Climate Justice Charter comes out of a process, and we're trying to build a movement, a post-apartheid movement that can tackle this big problem. So thank you for reading that chapter, and thank you for standing up for climate justice, and I hope the rest of you join us.
All right. Yeah, a hand for him who's read the chapter.
Yes.
All right. Any other questions?
Vishwas, trying to live an ethical life in the context of our politics must be a huge challenge. Mm-hmm. So I just wondered about what some of the key compromises that you've had to make and how you've lived with them. And secondly, how do you plan on popularizing a 600-page book so that the ideas there become mainstream and don't get basically locked into a book in a shelf somewhere?
Yeah, and that's coming from a playwright.
Yes.
Yeah.
Hey.
Thanks, Mike.
Mike, thanks for that. On the latter question, I was quite surprised, This book is now in the national conversation 2 years running. I thought, well, okay, we had our launches last year, that's enough. And you know what happens to books here, eventually they phase out. They're not part of our conversation. So this was great, that second year running. I was at the Time of the Writer Festival in Durban as well recently. And people wanting, like this, full house, talking, engaging. So I'm hoping that it will travel more. And people will engage with it and its politics and its ideas. And of course, it'll become a kind of a bridge to actual politics. People will use this to reflect on, well, where do I stand on the climate crisis? Where do I stand on hunger in this society? Where do I stand on inequality in this society? In terms of the compromises, well, maybe that's one of my weaknesses, I refuse to compromise. I refuse to compromise in the Communist Party around left renewal. So, when this kind of Zuma turn was happening and this return of an unreconstructed Marxism-Leninism, Well, I mean, I stood my ground. I mean, there's quite a few chapters in here and articles that talk about that. And as a result, I was expelled from the Communist Party because I wasn't willing to go down that path. I mean, the other thing is around climate. You know, I really think that if we are just going to lobby the Presidential Climate Commission and say, hey, here's the charter, now go and solve this problem, or Minister of Environment, here's the climate science, go solve the problem. I think, personally, I'm not willing to compromise with normal politics, let me put it that way, because this is a post-normal problem. We all need to own this problem. We all need to own the solution, and we all need to rise to the challenge of the fight. So for me, I'm willing to, together with everyone else that is in the climate justice trajectory movement that we're building, that's the politics we want. Yeah.
All right, Mike, if I can say something, there is a nascent poetry group in Johannesburg, Poets for Climate Justice. We also have 2 jazz CDs that have come out talking about ecological degradation. The bassist who now heads the department at Vets of Music, Carlo Mombelli, has a new jazz CD that talks.
Viva.
Doesn't talk.
Playwrights for Climate Justice.
But the music is about this crisis. Let's take we have 5 minutes. We're told we've got to keep to the time. There's another program that's coming here. There's a hand over there.
Okay, so Vishwas, you mentioned solidarity at the beginning. I read the book. I found it unputdownable. So I'm reading it for the second time. But the thing that still stands out for me is this context of solidarity. Is social solidarity a sensible starting point for civil society to engage with all the crises at the moment?
Thank you. That's a very beautiful question. It's at the heart of all of this. So even the kind of ethics that's being evoked and so on, you know, love and freedom and so on, this can only be realized by aggregating our power, by building the bridges, the solidarities. The lessons in history are there. You know, fighting slavery, people were only able to do that, whether it's the Haitian Revolution or whatever, by uniting, okay? Fighting against colonialism and the anti-colonial movements we've had, the only way they could shrug off colonialism was by uniting and building powerful movements, okay? We've had 3 cycles of resistance to neoliberalism, and it's thrown up different movements globally. This book is in dialogue with those movements. I've been part of the World Social Forum process over these past 3 decades, engaging with some of the critical thinkers, trying to think about what is the new left politics today, etc. And again, a lot of the impacts of those movements, whether it was Seattle against the World Trade Organization, whether it was unemployed people's movements in Spain taking over squares and public spaces, etc., whether it was workers taking over factories in Argentina when the factories collapsed, when the economy collapsed, in 2001, it was these solidarities that congealed, that came together, gave people confidence. I visited the factories in Argentina with my partner Michelle 3 times. It was amazing that those workers didn't take over those factories because they were card-carrying members of some party and they wanted to socialize the means of production or anything. No. They worked in those factories for 3 decades, 4 decades. They suddenly were losing their jobs. There was no wage to take home to feed their families. And from there, they decided, well, we're going to defend our jobs and we're going to take over these factories. And they did that to the point where it became a very conscious act of saying no boss anymore, okay? We are running this factory. We are the owners of this factory. Today, there's 350 factories, ladies and gentlemen, run by workers in Argentina. And it's confronting this global crisis from below. That's solidarity. And there's many examples like this. But for the struggles we have to confront, it's an imperative. Thank you.
All right. The time is up.
There's a hand up there.
Okay.
Good morning. I have not read your book. My colleague here has read his, and you have somebody there. And I may read your book based on the answer that you give me.
Go for it.
That sounds like conditional politics, but
Go for it.
I work on the ground, and I work with communities. Yeah. And so as you're talking, all this theory stuff and, all of that, I find difficult to wrap my mind around that. My question is, I'm sitting at the table with my family. What do I tell them, and what kinds of conversations do we have that might move the kinds of things that you're saying to bring them down to the table? That's my question.
I think that's an important point. I'll give it to Vish to finish on that. Let me just say that Vish has co-edited, authored 16 books. There are 3 that are on the pipeline, and I took off my hat because I want to thank him for his contribution.
Thank you. Thank you.
In my language, I think the English stole it from isiXhosa, is ukothulela umnqwazi, to take off the hat.
Thank you.
You know, I always have my hat on, but this time I put down
Literally.
my hat. And I just want to say, Vish, before you answer the question, is that whenever you produce a book, some of us, your friends, comrades, we are always amazed by the productivity. So we have a word in isiZulu, and we just said, hey, uVish uyakhiqiza. Uyakhiqiza, which means Vish is producing. And this thing of uyakhiqiza is taken from, if on a production line, let's say something goes on the line, when it gets finished and then it falls into the bin, and you can see that it's called alliteration, where the sound, which it falls. So whenever we hear you producing a book, we just, hey, uVish uyakhiqiza. And this is a way to show that we are very grateful of what you do. I don't think that we can change the world without understanding how the present system works. And people who've tried to change the world without understanding how it works have messed things up. So ideas, concepts, theory, and I say this as someone who spent his adult life as a unionist, are important. And books, ideas, are very, very critical. And if we don't take them seriously, we're going to mess up what we think we are trying to change and make things worse. But take the other question and your last closing words, and then that will be all from me.
I'm intimidated by that last question. Thank you, though, Dinga. Thank you for your words. It means a lot to me. Maybe the place to start at a dinner table is the food that's on that table or not on that table. A lot of the work I've done over the years has been around food. I saw a lot of hunger in township communities over the years. Coming out of that, and I set up like 300 cooperatives in township communities. Many failed because people were hungry. Okay, so for me, the food issue is central to everything. It intersects with whether you can reproduce your own life. It intersects with whether we can reproduce our society, a healthy society, a capable society. And so I really think that at the dinner table, there's a whole lot behind where the food comes from that you can talk about. How is this food produced? Who produces this food? Okay. Some of those answers might seem obvious, but actually, when we do ask who produces the food, it's not the farmer, actually. It's not the industrial food system. Actually, it's the worms in the soil. It's the bees that pollinate. It's the particular geological conditions that enable things to happen. There's more to food than just those who make profits from food. I think that's what I'm getting at. So for me, at my university, we feed 1,000 students a day. Coming out of my teaching in 2015, there was too much hunger at that university, so we set up a food garden. Today we have 6 food gardens. We have a communal kitchen where the students can cook their own meals. It's slow food culture rather than that fast food rubbish. And so they're having very different conversations about food, food and drought, food and nature, food and life. So I hope that resonates with you, and that I hope you at the dinner table can take this forward. Thank you.
I can see that.
Yeah, thank you. I passed.
All those who are interested in the book is for sale. And again, thanks to Jakes Gerwel Foundation for organizing this. And thank you to you for coming. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Dinga.
I can put on my hat now.